Hi, I'm Clark Brenzel. I'm the Weed Control Specialist with the Saskatchewan Ministry of Agriculture. We're here in this field of wheat today that has a few weed challenges. And one of the things we need to be aware of is that when we have escapes in our fields like this, we have to consider the idea that there could be resistance in the field. So we've got some wild oats here today that we'll look at and look at sampling methods for collecting samples to go to our crop protection lab for herbicide resistance testing. And we'll look at some other methods for other different weeds, and hopefully that'll result in you having a good sample going into our crop protection lab for testing. Okay, so we're in this field of wheat looking at our wild oats here, and what I like to use for wild oat collection is actually an insect sweep net. It's really handy because wild oats are really prone to shattering. And so if you've got grassy weeds that are very prone to shattering, this is a really good tool in trying to get those seeds out of the head of the plant and into the sample without a whole lot of other extra junk. In some cases, what happens is people just run their hands up the top of the plant like that and pull the sample out, but they end up with a lot of chaff. And we don't want a whole lot of that chaff at the crop protection lab because it causes a lot of problems with us trying to get the sample prepared. So the sweep net is actually a very good way to conduct that sampling on wild oats. And the other tried and true method would be just to take the plants, especially if you've got plants that are tumbleweeds like kochia, just collect those when they're a little bit prior to maturity, and just like you would with canola sample, take those plants, cut them off with a pair of clippers, and then put them into one of these poly seed bags or an old pillowcase or something like that, to allow them to dry down, and then once they're dry, you can do a bunch of stomping on that bag, and then that sample shatters out into the bag and you just get the pure sample of seed to take to the lab. A little more difficult to collect, say if we've got plants like Canada thistle here and some of our sow thistle in the foreground. They're Windborne seeds, so a battery-powered cordless vacuum is actually a really good way to sample those plants and get the seeds off of the plants without a whole lot of extra debris and without losing a lot of the seeds that will, as soon as you touch them, want to break away and fly away from your sample. You can approach the plant with the vacuum on and then draw all those reed seeds into the vacuum cup, and then you've got a canister ready right here that's full of those weed seeds, and you can tell what you've got in the canister just by looking at it. Question of how much seed do we need for a sample? And for wild oats, what we're looking at is about a large coffee can volume of wild oats without chaff in it for our sampling. So we're looking at anywhere between 1,000 and 2,000 seeds, and that's roughly what will fit into our large coffee can. For smaller seeded weeds, so things like mustards and things like that, we're looking at maybe a smaller coffee can, so one that's a little bit shorter and narrower, and that gives us adequate seeds to be taking or doing that testing. And if we're looking at shipping these samples, we want to make sure that our samples are dry. We want to make sure that they're clean so that we don't get mold in transport. And the other thing that is one of our banes is the plastic Ziploc bag. One of the problems with plastic Ziploc bags is that they don't breathe, and if you've got samples that are the slightest bit wet, then what happens is that they get into the bag, they start molding, and you lose the viability of your seed. There's other ways that we can lose viability as well, is that these things, when they're all zipped up, they also make great greenhouses. So if you throw them on the dash of your pickup truck, you end up ramping up the temperature in that bag very dramatically, even if your windows are open, and you can end up killing your seed, and then you've got a sample that comes into our lab, looks really good, but the sample is dead as a doornail, or the ones that aren't dead are so dormant that we can't get them to germinate. So those are some of the things that are tips for getting samples to our crop protection lab in good condition and making sure that we can provide you with a really positive sample and positive results from your sample coming into the lab, so that you know exactly what's going on in your field so you can make good management decisions.